Hello, welcome to Signal Noise. My name is Brian Lamar. Happy to be here. As always, joining me, my partner in crime, Andrew DeCilles. Hello, Andrew. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful, Brian. How are you today?
Doing great. It's a Friday. Winter is upon us. And we have an awesome episode today. I'm really excited. I don't know, I'm not sure about you, but it's the first time, I think, in our history of the podcast that we've had Qualtrics on. So welcome, Qualtrics. I'll let you introduce yourselves, but we have Ellen Houston and Jordan Harper on. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Excited to be here.
Yeah, love maybe first we get started, introduce yourself. We'll start with you, Ellen. How are you? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good. I'm not ready for winter being upon us, so thank you for reminding me of the coldness outside. But I'm Ellen Houston. I lead our Edge Center of Excellence here at Qualtrics. That means a lot of things, but really we're focused a lot on the intersection of market research and AI and doing a ton in the synthetic data space. So really cool and exciting place to be right now.
Awesome. Jordan.
Hey guys, great to be here. My name's Jordan Harper. I'm Senior Principal Thought Leader for Qualtrics Edge, which is one of those job titles that kind of means nothing and everything all at once. But I see kind of my role is really connecting the amazing sort of technology, platform, systems, data that we have and are building to customer problems, to real needs, to the challenges that are out there in the market, and finding those stories that bring those two things together. Articulating the value.
Awesome. And you both mentioned the Qualtrics Edge Center of Excellence. That sounds like a great thing. What is Edge? What is a Center of Excellence? I love talking about centers of excellence, first of all, so I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, well, it's excellence, obviously, Ryan. We do.
Right.
So as a Edge is really kind of our deep expertise within the market research space. So a lot of the things that you would think about with traditional MR agencies or areas of expertise, whether that is designing research, skilled folks that are kind of practitioners, and then we're also leaning in closely to the world of sample synthetic and the innovations that AI is doing to change the space, which we hope is a lot. The center of excellence within that world, within this market research space, is really an intersection of we're sitting really closely with our product and engineering team on what's actually getting built. How do we think about that? How do we bring the voice of market researchers and the customer? And then getting to sit alongside our delivery teams as well to make sure that what is happening is getting translated back to the market and people that are trying to use our products day in and day out. So it's a fun space to be kind of cross-functionally involved. But I don't know, Jordan, would you add anything? It is hard to define excellence.
Yeah, I mean, obviously to get excellence, it's where you put all the smart people, right? So
That's right.
so Ellen and I are surrounded by some of the smartest people in Qualtrics, I think, who sort of think deeply and work deeply on kind of validating our approach to research, and particularly in the area of kind of AI and synthetic, where there's lots of hype, there's lots of noise to sort of get on the podcast theme. Finding the signal in that noise is like the job of the scientists and the smart people inside the Center of Excellence, and then it's our job to communicate that to the world and make sure that we're recognizing the value.
How long has Edge been? Was Edge a new thing, and how many people are on the team, or has this been around kind of before we started talking about AI?
Yeah, Edge is kind of a reincarnation of what has been what would historically be called like research services or market research teams. So we have a long tenure of that within Qualtrics. And then a little over a year and a half ago, when we really started this journey, kind of focused on the innovation of what does it mean to revolutionize the space, and in an industry that we say with love, having worked in the industry that has kind of lagged in some of that innovation and adoption. This was really kind of the next generation of what we're thinking about when we look ahead to what new technology means for market research. So not new to the world, new to, I would say, its purpose and its focus.
And speaking as a researcher that has been in this industry for a long time, no pressure or anything, but I think we depend on a company like Qualtrics to be innovative and to kind of lead the charge in our industry, because I think you said lagged and I completely agree with that. Our industry, it was not a tech industry, was not innovative even 10 years ago. I think we're becoming that. And so I think that what you guys are doing, regardless of what it is, I'm excited to hear about it, the specifics around it, and what you're doing, because it's really going to, again, it's going to drive so many important things in our industry. No pressure or anything.
Well, and I am curious, part of the reason for that is that marketing research tends to think of itself as like a hard science. And typically when you have that sort of academic mindset, there's very little room to kind of play in the gray areas and to push the limits of what's possible. I'm curious, what are both of your kind of like long-term backgrounds in artificial intelligence, in marketing research? From what lens are y'all approaching this problem?
Yeah, so my background is not strictly speaking in market research, although I kind of say I've been research adjacent for most of my career. I was actually sort of a university originally a scientist, so I studied physics and did a master's in astrophysics, and then worked in nuclear engineering for a while, which is kind of a very strange background to lead to where I get to now. But all, what ties those things together, all about data, all about the scientific process, all about research, all about backing up action with evidence. And then I kind of pivoted from there into the world of new media, digital media, back in the sort of early 2000s. So as a developer, and then running a tech team, and then working inside a bigger integrated marketing agency as sort of tech director, CTO. So running the build of these platforms. But the thing that I think made my sort of approach to that slightly different to a lot of technical people is I spend most of my time with the strategists and with our C-suite clients, trying to understand what they were trying to achieve, where they were trying to go, and why they needed to leverage technology to get there. If they did need to leverage technology to get there, we've had an enormous amount of change in the last kind of 15 years in tech, 20 years now. A 15-year stat is like 5 years old. But yeah, like, for the last sort of 20, 25 years, we've had so much change and so many moments where businesses have gone, do I need a social media presence? Do I need to put things on YouTube? Like, where do I interact with my customers? Do I need to send them surveys, or do I need to doorstep them, or do I need to, how do I understand what's going on and what I should leverage to get to where we want to go as a business? And so, as part of those teams, we leveraged data platforms. We leveraged Qualtrics and lots of other systems and platforms and data providers and research providers to get insight on customers for our clients in the sort of agency world. So it's kind of interesting now being on the other side of the fence, doing the same kind of thing, which is, understanding the technology and working out why and how it should be applied to make the biggest difference to our customers and clients. But seeing the research from the inside out and working with loads of smart and experienced researchers like Ellen and the rest of the team is really exciting. Great.
So astrophysics to engineering to marketing data to business strategy. So that's how you get the title of thought leader. It's just, I'm just really smart. I can pick apart these problems. I mean, I say it kind of jokingly, but also seriously, that like what your role here is to go into these strategic conversations and decide kind of the why, what, and how of, is this a technological problem? Is this, and if it is, what can we use? What do we need to build? In having that kind of large scale strategic thinking around these abstract problems, because we're at the very infancy of artificial intelligence, at the very infancy of synthetics, and so it makes sense that someone like you is at the forefront, making sure that we're continually asking those questions.
I was very lucky back in the day in 2005 when I first sort of pivoted into digital media and technology, and I sort of started at this agency as a developer. And about 2 weeks in, someone said, "Oh, we've got this project that we've been asked to sort of look at to build a mobile website for something." But people don't really look at websites on their phones. Like, I don't know what a mobile website would even look like. It's all, black and white and text only. And I don't know if anyone wants to take this on. And I just kind of put my hand up and sort of often talk about that being like quite a pivotal moment in my career, because that sort of ended up thrusting me into the sort of cutting edge of the mobile revolution that happened over the next sort of 5 years, from no one using the internet on their phone to like the iPhone 3G by, the late sort of 2000s. And this sort of what's happening now with AI reminds me of that, like where nobody could have predicted in 2005 all of the, new businesses that would emerge out of nowhere, the old businesses that would disappear into obscurity, the huge change that would happen in the way people live their lives and they interact with people and they interact with technology that mobile brought about. And I'm seeing and feeling that same kind of energy with AI now. Like we have no idea. We're in like 2007. The iPhone hasn't even come out
Right.
yet.
Right.
in the sort of shift that's happening with AI. Everyone thinks ChatGPT is the iPhone. I don't think it is. I think there's more to come. There's more things that will make everything change and shift. And it's kind of exciting to live through that for a second time. I feel quite lucky to be not only living through it, but kind of working in it, inside it. Is yeah, very, very lucky.
Yeah. What a fascinating perspective. And it must be so enjoyable for you to be able to live in that kind of big picture headspace rather than, kind of down, head down in executional and in building. Okay, so Jordan, so you're the resident genius of the team. Ellen, you're in charge of the entire Center of Excellence. What's your background? How did you end up here? And how does that kind of contribute to the problem?
Yeah, I think, well, my every plan I've ever made for my career, I've abandoned and blown up. So I think similar to Jordan, I've kind of come along. I would say that I'm a business person raised by nerds. So I grew up in a household raised by a computer programmer from the early 70s when it was cards and things, and a mechanical engineer. So I was always just grew up in a world of logical thinking. So my big rebellion was that I was going to major in marketing and not a more technical background. But every time I would go into a role, I always ended up migrating to kind of the more technical sides of things. So I started on the agency side in a media agency, probably similar time as Jordan, and migrated over a lot to like media return on investment, marketing mix modeling. It was the era of programmatic and understanding attribution and all those things. Went back to school, and then I focused more on kind of marketing strategy, a lot of research driven segmentation, white space prioritization, who are we as a brand? What does that look like? And then always again kind of focused on the more quant side of that. And then had the opportunity to be at a data science startup for about 4 years where I was kind of in the intersection and translation space of how do we understand enough about how the math to make that make sense and be impactful to the business user who wants the power of that. But, there is sometimes a communication divide between what can happen in modeling machine learning and now AI and what does that mean and how do I decision off it and how do I understand if this solution is good or bad or right. So I would say that as I've gone, I've always lived in that translation layer between kind of technical teams and then how do we make an impact and be understandable. And so that's been a journey I've had the privilege of continuing at Qualtrics. I started leading our analytics team, and then as some of these things evolved, was able to move over to our center of excellence and kind of play at those altitudes that still exist.
That's really cool. And straddling that line, kind of being the translator and making sense of both sides is not an easy task. I can't do it at all. And so I love that for you. And anyone who can do that, you have a very special skill. So I would love to hear, we're here to talk about Qualtrics Edge. We're here to talk about what you're doing with artificial intelligence, specifically in the marketing research online survey space. You're developing some fascinating products, fascinating models in the synthetics arena. Tell us about what you're working on, what's available today, what the vision is, where it's going. Lay the groundwork.
Yeah. So in the synthetic space, we've been hugely concentrated on thinking about, as you said, that AI application into how do we generate and expedite the world of research. So when we hear synthetic, like if anyone's, going to the conferences and getting the newsletters, I'm sure you could, synthetic and AI are probably the top two words that would show up on a word cloud, right? Like everyone's like, I've got it. And so a lot of what we're doing is we've really focused on developing kind of a foundational model within our world. So when we think about how users experience this, you write a survey in and you get kind of row level responses that are modeled synthetic responses out. So it's slightly different than what a lot of people think of as a persona. Like I get to talk to someone that's been trained on my data, or kind of I get gut checks or quick research by putting things in an off the shelf LLM. So we've really focused on saying, like, how do we take what can go right and wrong with LLMs and better fit it to that market research use case by doing the training, the fine tuning, and then being able to generate the granularity of responses that researchers expect. I think someone alluded to earlier, like the academic and healthy cynicism that comes within our space. And so that's been a really fun evolution to just say, like, this is a totally new thing. And so it's met with varying levels of excitement, curiosity, and doubt, all in healthy amounts. So it's been fun to just kind of get closer to that. So available today is what we call edge audiences, is access to synthetic respondents, as well as human respondents as people would like. That is just the beginning with where we're headed. We're then going to evolve that into kind of more niche audiences, change the ways with which you can interact that, whether that's more conversational or not, as well as then thinking about how do we automate and wrap up AI around some of the broader parts of the research process outside of sample. And that's where we start to think about agentic or automating those broader things. But Jordan, as someone who has not been talking about this, how does that line up with how you would describe what we're up to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the like key part of that is the general sentiment, right? Like with every part of our life, with every business or personal system or platform or decision that we use, like we're asking, like, how can AI make this better? How can AI make this faster? And there's a bunch of applications of AI throughout the Qualtrics platforms that make our customers' lives easier, whether it's helping them create better surveys or stress test ideas as they go. But like the sort of ultimate application of AI, I think, in our space is this idea of synthetic respondents. So then kind of going back to like what the way I look at these things is, how can we do that in the right way? Like what's the right application of this, and what's the right way to think about it and talk about it and apply it versus all of the other ways in which it could be applied. There are fewer right ways than there are wrong ways. And so helping sort of steer the product and steer our customers to use it in the right way, because the intentions, as I said before, like we are a foundational research organization. Like Qualtrics was founded on this discipline, this idea of like getting insight out of humans, and so that remains the goal. So the question is, how can synthetic improve that? How can it add to it? I think it's fair to say we don't see synthetic as a replacement for humans. Like our message is not stop doing all of your human panel research, replace it all with synthetic, and you'll save a load of money and everything will be great. It's how can AI, how can synthetic respondents add to the research that you're already doing? How can it deliver different perspectives and faster access and help you speed up and improve the process that you're already going through?
Can you talk a little bit about how you're building it? When I think of Qualtrics, I think of quant, and it sounds like your background is primarily quant. Not that you're not great at solving problems in general. Curious if there's a space for qual, and kind of how you started to think about building this.
Yeah, we had a ton of debate when we started a couple years ago on like what is the first project? What's the first way in? We jokingly sometimes say we're kind of doing the hard thing first. So even when we talk to researchers in the space that are using more qual-based and persona solutions, and we talk to them honestly about like what does this look like for you in terms of, is it good enough? What is validation? How does that feel okay? And it's kind of a sniff test, right? Like it sounds like and feels like someone I would talk to in a focus group, but it's like a little harder to totally validate that. So I think you're right in that we did start from the quant space, because we can kind of think of it as that is fine-tuning the engine that will come to life in lots of different models of car. So we're kind of fine-tuning what we have as an approach in the model, and that does start from a quantitative kind of research background, but we're definitely looking at and thinking about more qualitative interactions and kind of even, whether that comes to life as personas or focus groups, like single conversations or multiple over time. But that then still wraps around the most powerful and tuned engine that we have created in starting with some of the quant space. So I think where we kind of thought through it is like this accelerates the quality of output we'll get to give while changing and evolving the format that shows up for users.
Yeah, with any LLM, with any AI platform, the most important thing is the model that's being used and how that's been trained and how that's been built up. In the early days of ChatGPT versus Gemini versus Claude versus Perplexity versus all of these systems that were out there, like the key question to ask is like, what's it been trained on? So Facebook have access to 15 years of people posting on Facebook and all of that data that they can use to train it on. So Facebook, a model trained by Facebook, is pretty good at approximating the kind of things that people say on Facebook. ChatGPT has largely been the most successful of the sort of open consumer LLMs, because early doors it got access to the largest and most diverse sets of data to train that model on. and where we think that we're offering a USP with the model that we've built, a foundational model from the ground up, trained on survey data that we've collected over decades. So what our model is really good at is knowing how people answer surveys, how they think about questions in surveys, how they approach it, how they respond to it. And it's combining that foundation with that. And that's obviously the most difficult thing to build. Anybody can go into Chat GPT and type act like a insert persona, answer this question, and it will spit out an answer. But validating that response is almost impossible. And the likelihood of hallucinations and responses that have nothing to do with the question are pretty high. And there's been a bunch of really interesting papers published recently that go into that empirically and test it and show the difference between them and human responses. And what I think is, like Alan said, we've done the hard thing first. We built a model, which is not a trivial thing to do. It takes a huge amount of data, a huge amount of engineering resources, a huge amount of time and investment. And we've been pretty uniquely situated to have all of those three things at hand to be able to leverage to do the hard thing. And now we can start building off that and using that as the foundation for all of the end user applications. And the first test for it is like, can it take surveys alongside humans and give us results that look like they would if humans were taking them?
How are you determining where to focus? That's kind of my question. So is it, oh wow, we can't find any Hispanics for this study, so I need to go out and model Hispanics? Is it younger males? And when I think of the harder to reach audiences as a researcher, that's what I think of. I'm hoping they're building the synthetic power of unacculturated Hispanics in America and finding people that have type 2 diabetes and finding people, 20-year-old males that refuse to take surveys. I want them to, and that's how I think about it. My guess is you're thinking about it a little bit differently.
We totally see and hear the value in those narrower, we call more niche audiences, right? Because like if I'm a researcher, that's the thing that took me 3 weeks in field to get, and I got 50 people when I wanted 200, right? And then you're just kind of struggling and on your back foot. We did start with broader audiences just because that's where we knew we'd have the most appeal, and also like just there's a breadth of research in that space. But as we've then kind of started to focus and look ahead to more niche and narrower audiences, B2B, more targetable, smaller audiences, that's where we're also excited to kind of partner with organizations, because that is always as good as the model. The model is as good as their inputs, right? And so that's why we're really excited with partners like ROI Rocket, because as we look ahead to things like B2B and IT decision makers and all of these things, we want to make sure that we're using the right core foundation to help inform and kind of broaden our reach within that space. So definitely moving forward to some of those more niche and narrower audiences, but started a little more broadly. And I think the broader audiences also, when we've talked to users, like giving them kind of the comfort, because there's usually an application within that space for them that feels more common, accessible, or even lower risk. And so I think it's been a good place for us to kind of start, gain traction, gain experimentation, get that user feedback, and then we'll use those learnings as we continue to expand smaller, if that makes sense, go to more narrower audiences.
That's a
I
great
think
way.
as we do that as well, one of the really interesting things to explore is going to be actually measuring how doing that changes the quality of the responses of the model and its ability to answer these questions, because I don't think it's as predictable as some people might like to think it is. And that's because, for the majority of our lives, technology has been very deterministic. An input goes in, and the output that comes out, there's a logical set of steps, there's an algorithm, there's something that input moves through to get to the output. And it's a fairly, even if it's a very complex recommendation algorithm, or the Facebook's graph algorithms, or all of that kind of stuff, it's still a logical process, A to B to C to D to F, and you get to the end. If you keep putting the same thing in, you'll get the same thing out. The thing that makes AI, or this generation of AI, these LLMs, different is that they're not deterministic in that way, that putting the same thing in does not always yield the same thing out, and it can yield very different things on the other end. So how they actually go from input to output is not something you can write down and tweak. So you can't go, okay, so our model is not sounding like we would expect it to sound if we were asking young male Hispanics these questions. So let's tweak this and let's add this, and then we'll get better answers. The only way for us to know whether the changes that we're making have an impact is to test it, to make the change, test it, do the experimentation, compare the results. Like I get sort of going right back into my deep past, like it's back to science, like design an experiment, test the things. And that's what a lot of the people in the Center of Excellence are doing every day, is designing those experiments, doing those tests to work out whether the changes that we made with this version of the model, because we're constantly updating the model that we built, what impact is this having on these type of questions, when we load in, when we start building the B2B focused model, how does the B2B focused model respond differently compared to the B2C one? It might not be in ways that we would predict it to. And discovering that and finding that out is what I think is most exciting about this area, because it's genuine discovery. We've got access to, it's maybe over romanticizing it a bit, and I get told off for this by some of the guys in our team, but it's like we've discovered a new species and we've got to work out like what's going on inside its brain. Even though we built the brain, we don't really know how all those things stitch together and function together. So it's the outputs that are important, and testing them. So I think that's like the most exciting thing about, as we dig into niche audiences and different types of data and model tweaks, is having to test whether it worked or not.
That is so cool. Brian and I talk about all the time that our favorite thing about the podcast is like nerding out about stuff. And that's just, we're going to go listen to that like 5 times. That's so fascinating. So it sounds like then, and Ellen, you did mention this, we are in partnership. ROI Rockets, B2B Data is going to be helping you in this process. Can you describe how in this journey towards providing the best, I'm not going to say most accurate, because that might not be the best, that might not most predictable, might not be quote unquote the best for decisioning. So I'm just going to say a more useful, broadly better product in general. How does the training data itself interact in that process? And what's kind of like the importance of the quality of that data? That's kind of abstract, but I think particularly in the vein of like Qualtrics has, like you said, decades of survey data. How do you even begin to determine like what's good, what's bad, what's useful, what's not? I mean, the Herculean effort that it must take to like open up those files and say, where do we even start? I would love to hear about that journey.
Yeah, it's been a journey for sure. I think the cool and challenging side about generative AI and LLMs in this whole world is you put something in, it's going to generate something out, right? And so whether it generated something that's useful, or whether it generated something that was a hallucination, or whether it generated something that was in between, you're always going to get an answer. So like if you think about regressions or ML or models of the past, you could break things, right? And you could kind of see easily, where did I break it? What coefficient seemed wrong? What model parameter probably wasn't right? And with generative AI, it's a little more mysterious, so to speak, right? Like it's a little harder to say off the bat, like what made that seem so extreme or so non-extreme. And so that's where, to start, the importance of data has always been important in modeling, but even elevates, because like I'm always going to get an answer. So now the bar on evaluating whether that answer is good or bad is even higher. And so it's even more important that when I'm starting with data is representative, is cohesive, and is tuned to the use case that I care about. So when we started in the consumer space and we thought a lot about data, some of the first results we got out when we were very early in pilots, we saw a lot of the biases that even the models just putting on top of that data. There were higher central tendencies, there were high levels of agreeableness, right? Some of those things that are just core to how these models tend to function. So we look a lot at, is this data representative? So we're doing things like doing different cuts, checking for bias, checking for how this model performs across metrics, across those subgroups within has been consumer to date. But when we think about other audiences like B2B, it'll be like firmographics, industries, roles, right? How does this look? Is it performing well in aggregate? Is it performing well with some of these subgroups? And then we also care a lot about, as you said, it being the highest quality. You can shove something in and then we'll get something out. But then when we go to compare to what we know as high sources of truth, high quality sources of truth within the market, we're going to see that greater degree of variance. the other thing that's been really interesting to us, I touched on earlier, is this idea of representativeness, right? You need the pie to be pieces of that whole pie. So in the world, like whether we're doing kind of full foundational models or you're taking other approaches like RAG or, kind of boost versions that are taking, call it a little circle, big circle problem, right? Like you're going to start with a little circle of information and you're going to extrapolate that out into a big circle that you hope is representative of the world, right? We've done that our whole lives with weighting. We used to say, I only got 2 Ellens, but I needed 50 Ellens. So I'm going to weight you up in my sample to make you look more like the big circle, right?
Yeah.
And so it's that same idea, like those same concepts still apply because we have to make sure what we're starting with is a good picture and encapsulation of the market or of the world or of the group we care about. The model doesn't know if it is or isn't. And so we have to make sure that what we're starting with has that representation or we won't get that representation on the outside. And I think that's just a huge, sorry, went a little broader, but a huge consideration for folks, no matter how they're evaluating, whether they're partnering with Qualtrics or other partners in the space, like making sure you understand what is, I call it the ins and outs. What am I giving you? What's the model going to do with that? And then what's going to come out the other side? And those are kind of the 3 steps, no matter what approach we're taking. And so if those are the only 3 steps we're controlling, what I started with, what the model's going to do, and then what I get to look at on the other side, we need to make sure what I'm starting with is of high quality, robust, and representative, because even the best model is not going to be able to get you the thing on the other side if that's not true.
I have a ton of questions all over the
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not even sure where to go. Maybe I'll start here. Jordan, you said earlier that we're not at the iPhone 3 moment of AI. That's kind of scary and also very interesting to me. Where do you think this is going to take us in the next 12 months, 3 years? How fast is this evolving?
I heard a really good bit of advice yesterday, which was be very careful about predicting the future, particularly if it's about things that haven't happened yet. And like I find sort of predictions in this kind of area, they either inevitably go one of 2 ways. Like either you're miles off and you look stupid, or you're spot on and you say it's going to happen in 5 years, but it happens in 6 weeks.
Right.
And and I think like with AI, we're like fully in that zone right now. Like there's lots of predictions that you'll see out there right now around sort of agentic and us handing off entire chains of tasks without paying any attention and having even something as simple as the example that everybody uses, like booking a vacation or something like that. I don't know that I'm ever going to be in a position where I'm perfectly comfortable with like an AI just saying like I want to go on holiday in 2 weeks and then it going off, knowing who I am, knowing what I like, knowing what I want to do, how much I want to spend or whatever, going and actually making all of the bookings and then just like sending me the confirmations to go on holiday. It kind of, a lot of it is going to be how we want to see AI kind of show up in our lives. And I think that's actually something relevant for research as well and for what we're building. Like the question is not just what can synthetic respondents do or what can our model achieve. It's like what do researchers actually want it to do? It goes back to that thing of like one of the reasons we don't see it as a complete replacement for human research is that I don't know any researcher that says, I don't want to ask humans anymore. I just want to get it all done with AI in 10 minutes. You need that sort of extra layer of validation to feel comfortable in standing by the data that you're presenting in order to make some business decision or make a recommendation or develop your product in a certain way. Like I think it, so doing our own research, doing research ourselves and understanding what researchers want out of AI is really important. We just published our market research trends report a couple of weeks ago for 2026. And we do those reports precisely to try and understand this. Like how are people in the industry viewing AI? How do they want to use it? How do they see themselves using it? And, sure, we're going to surprise people. You're going to use things in ways that you didn't think you wanted to use them. For sure. I often kind of tell a story of like my first like aha moment with ChatGPT was with a very early version, and it was something completely silly and trivial. But my son was really into Captain Underpants books, and I was like, and I heard something about like its ability to just write a story from a prompt or something like that. So I was like, okay, I want a Captain Underpants book starring my son's called Finn, starring a boy called Finn who likes skateboarding and soccer, create a story. And it wrote give me the first chapter, and it wrote a chapter that could have been straight out of one of the books. Now, from copyright point of view and things like that, there's a whole conversation to be had there. But when I read what came out of it, I was like, oh, this is different. This is like something fundamentally different to what we've had before. Being able to write a few sentences about what I want and then instantly have back, like if I'd pitched the author of those books that pitch, he might have come back in a month
Yeah.
with something that would probably have been better, but I wouldn't
Well,
have been able to print it out and give it to my son that afternoon to read.
that's amazing. Do you have any cool things similar to Captain Underpants that has happened in as you've kind of gone through this process over the past year and a half, like something that you didn't know was even possible that maybe y'all have figured out, oh my gosh, wow, weren't even thinking about it like this, and this is really cool.
I mean, one of the things that stood out to me for sure is, a huge part of the work that we do is to try and validate the model, right? So, sending the model through, taking a survey, sending it to humans, comparing the responses, and seeing how closely the model matches the human responses, so we can say it's a good approximation of the way humans would answer these surveys. And obviously, it's not 100% correct 100% of the time. But what I found instantly compelling and interesting and spent a lot of time like digging into is, so where it's different, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that the model wasn't trained properly or it didn't have access to this kind of data? Does it mean that we didn't write the question in the right way, that it's been interpreted incorrectly? And actually, when you think about it, there's probably a lot of humans that answer this question and interpret it in the same way the model did. It's just the model exaggerates problems with survey design, which is like one of the sort of big benefits of using it, I think. But the most interesting thing is where you're looking at it and going, hold on a minute, I think the model might be telling us the truth here, and humans are not telling us the whole truth. They're telling us what makes them feel good. And we know these biases exist in survey respondents, right? There's a bunch of biases, and we try and counter them and adjust our analysis to take them into account. But we've suddenly got access to this thing that just isn't beholden to some of those like very human biases and just tells us the actual truth. Truth is a very loaded word in that context, but take it advisedly. But tells us something that may be a slightly more honest representation of the way humans think and behave than humans tell us, because it's missing these things. And I think that was like a big, for me anyway, like a big aha moment of this technology, where you're like, oh, this can actually help us spot where there might be things that we need to dig into in a bit more detail when we analyze this survey, that we can't make a definitive statement about based on the human responses, even though the human responses are quite definitively answering this thing. We've got this other parallel organism, this predictive model of humans. This is actually, based on what I know, this is what humans should answer this question like. And where there's a difference, that is signal for me. Like, that's like, okay, there's something interesting going on here. Let's tap in, and the ability of synthetic to deliver fresh signal that we don't have access to by just asking humans. I think that's quite a big and exciting thing in research to me.
Yeah, I would build on that. I'd say one example of that is we were just curious, like if we can manipulate synthetic respondents in the same way we can manipulate humans, because we get the question a lot from researchers of like, do I have to think about writing a survey differently, right? So like we have trained ourselves for years on like what best practices are, how to mitigate order bias, social desire, all of these things, right? And so I partnered with one of the scientists on our team, and we're like, let's write a bad survey. Let's put some of those things in the world.
Love this.
See if we can manipulate a human, and then see if we can manipulate synthetic respondents. So we did one experiment where we randomly assigned people to 3 conditions. It was around cell phone use, ironically. And we had one where we had no priming, and then one we had positive priming statements about like the access of information and how much it's made my life better. And then we had one where we had negative priming statements of like, it's a distraction and I worry about my data, right? So we're just kind of surfacing those things to respondents. And we asked, like, are cell phones and technology overall for the world to benefit, doing more harm than good, or more good than harm, essentially. Humans are humans, and they totally fell for it, right? So like our neutral ones had a pretty standard distribution you would expect. The positive priming is skewed a little to the left of the scale. The negative priming, we didn't get all the way to the right of the scale, but definitely moved towards the middle, right? People are not ready to totally admit their cell phones might be bad. So, but we did see that shift. Same survey with synthetic respondents, very similar distribution to humans, but consistent. So while we're giving our responses our synthetic respondents at context and the identity of those things, they're not necessarily, to Jordan's point, subject to some of our human nature in the exact same ways. That doesn't mean it's bad or good. The overall distribution to the neutral case looked really similar. But it's that idea of like they're gonna act a little differently sometimes. So different always isn't always bad. Sometimes it's just different, right? And so we're having kind of nerdy fun where we start asking these questions. We're like, hey, can you prime them? Hey, we get the question a lot of like, how can a synthetic respondent respond to a concept it's never seen before? And my counter has been, Jordan, how can you respond to a concept you've never seen before? Right? Like there's not a magic thing where Jordan just has this Rolodex to be able to grade concepts, and synthetic respondents are very similar. So we just did another one where we ran our own fast casual breakfast concept to see like what did synthetic respondents rate and see and what did human, and the results were really similar. So it was just fun to like take those questions and, as Jordan said, take the science to them and say like, cool, let's find out. Let's experiment.
I love that you're doing this because one thing that I've learned over the course of this conversation is that you're treating this with a researcher's mind, not necessarily an innovation and AI mind, which I'm really happy to be able to say that because the detractors say, how do you validate for bias and how do you try to find nuance in research? And so I'm really impressed that you're doing that. As a nerdy researcher, the fact that you're trying to manipulate synthetic respondents makes me very, very happy.
I'm glad that our ill will is doing good.
Please continue to do that.
Yeah.
Andrew, I'm sure you have questions.
Yeah.
I have so many.
I have so many questions. We may need to do a 3-hour episode on months when there's more kind of things you can share. And oh wow. So if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it's that the synthetic respondents may be a little bit less subject to manipulation. Is that fair to like assert? I know that's what you just said.
Yeah.
Let's say that really, really quick.
I would say they are less subject for what we're seeing initially so far today to some of the biases that we as humans have. So whether it's social desirability, we've tested a couple so far, so I wouldn't say it's exhaustive or 100%. But when we think about common things like priming or social desirability or even question framing, we're seeing more consistent responses within the synthetic space, and we see sometimes more movement within humans. Again, that's not good or bad, but we've also trained humans for a really long time on how to answer surveys, and so like I'll
Yeah.
take it yes and pick on that.
Challenge it.
It's like not good or bad, but like I think most people when they see a 10-point scale, like they kind of know what you're asking me. Like I don't know that they're literally reading that question text word for word, right? Like they kind of have an indication of like the top of the scale means you did okay, right? And so it's just that type of learning. I would say we can assert that we are seeing differences in responses in how sometimes synthetic personas and humans respond when it comes to biases we know and recognize. There's a lot still to be explored and to be done in that space, but I would say there's some important learnings to be had.
And I think a lot of it can be explained by, I always believe in like fundamental analysis. Like quite often, there's a complex problem, there's a complex thing happening. What's at the root cause of it? Well, it's usually something very simple that, why is the transport network not running like we wanted to? It doesn't have enough money. Why are the schools in this area better than the schools in this area? Because the property taxes in that area are paying for better schools, better teachers, better facilities, better thing. It's always like quite a simple thing at the heart of it. And the way I've started to think about this thing with synthetics is quite simple. It's that with humans, we have an actual pressure when answering that survey. We've got limited amount of time to do things. And we want to get through it as quickly as possible. So we're rushing, and we've designed surveys to take less time and reduce the cognitive load on the people that we're asking questions of. So, instead of asking 17 individual questions, we put them in a matrix and we ask people to run those scales quickly. That's done to reduce the amount of thinking that the people have to do. But like thinking is kind of the point of asking the question, right? Like if they're not thinking, then we're getting worse answers. Synthetics are not troubled by how long it takes them to do something. When they tackle a question, they think about it. They break it down into the atomic components. Every bit of it they consider, they contextualize, they try to understand, and then they give you a thoughtful answer. I kind of say it's sort of a bit like research used to be. back in the day where, like, you a story I tell is my mom was a market researcher for a few years just after I was born, and went sort of door to door, standing on the high street, clipboards, like asking people questions. And I spoke to her about how she did that and like what it was like. And she talked about, having like long conversations with people, uh, not asking for 1 to 5, what do you think about this, but saying, well, when I say 5, I mean like it's something that you would blah 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 blah, and like have a long, detailed like conversation, questions back and forth for like 10 minutes over one question. Like synthetics are like research back in the day, where they can actually consider those questions a lot more deeply, and a lot more thoughtfully, and analyze them, and be logically sound about them, which is why they don't suffer from priming, because they're not instantly going to, oh yeah, I was thinking about that 2 minutes ago, and so that's going to affect my answer to this. They go like, no, what is the actual objective, in my subject objective world, like what do I think about the answer to this question? And that very simple truth, I think, probably explains a lot of the things that we see in terms of less bias, less ability to sort of prime or manipulate respondents, and all that kind of stuff. I think it's really pretty interesting.
So if you
A-
could
And
figure out how to make the models more annoyed by the fact that they're taking surveys in general.
You gotta make him grumpier, right? Yeah.
But
Yeah,
at the
add it
same
to every
time, though,
prompt. You've got 3 seconds to answer this,
yeah.
otherwise I'm going to take $100 off you.
right.
But at the same time, though, right? Like, if you were to do that, sure, it might look closer to humans, but maybe that's where some of the value lies, or some of the differentiation lies
Mhm.
between the primary collected human respondents. One buzzword we've been hearing is the organic respondents. People
Sure.
are not saying that. In the synthetics, is that behavioral difference, and are you getting more thoughtful responses to huge grids, to the kinds of exercises like that? So that kind of spurs my sort of last question. At the very beginning, Jordan, you were talking about being conscientious around what the best use cases are for synthetics, and also like what do researchers want it to do. And we are all in our world, and in our kind of like podcast world, Brian and I go to all the conferences, right? Everyone is afraid of, oh my gosh, is this going to replace humans? I don't think it will ever really go there. And I think you're also right to point out that many market researchers, because of that fear and that kind of extreme application, push back with, well, no, it's all junk, right? And never use that for anything. What are some of the prime applications, some of the main things that you hear from researchers that they want it to do? Like when this gets to iPhone 3 version, what do you think we're going to be using it for in research specifically?
I mean, we talk about synthetic as like a new member of your research team. Yeah, as like, it's like a new member on the team. It's not replacing anybody. It's not coming in to wipe the entire team clean. It's this new, incredibly powerful tool that you have access to almost shift the way you think about the work that you do as a researcher. So rather than spending your entire time designing surveys, crafting it, reviewing it, checking you haven't got any priming questions early on, making sure you followed all of the design considerations properly, then fielding it, waiting for the responses to come in, and then doing lots of data analysis. Instead of that, and that's the way, research has been for, since my mom was doing it like 45 years ago. Like, now we have access to something that allows you to be more agile, like test and iterate, like go through 5 different survey designs with respondents, even if they're synthetic respondents, before you even field it to a single human, because you've got an opportunity to test to see whether there are any biases or issues with the questions that you've asked pretty much instantly. The ability to sort of be more strategic as a researcher as a result. You're designing experiments for the surveys that you're going to send out, rather than just designing the surveys. I think that opportunity is huge in terms of increasing the value that researchers will add to organizations, because rather than, just writing survey, sending survey, getting results, sending results to the board, like they can actually collaborate with synthetics effectively to design better surveys, to test different kinds of things, to say like, we would never field this question because if it's wrong, we've burnt this huge sample of humans that we can't go back to. But you could fill it with synthetics and see what happens and see whether there's something interesting in there that might make you think you do want to risk fielding it with humans. So I think turning researchers into scientists, into experimenters, into a more valuable and valued part of an organization, I think is like the big pivot that can happen. And if you
Yeah,
had
we had the MR Trends report. It said in our most recent, 78% of researchers that we surveyed, it's a global survey among market researchers, believe that synthetic will make up more than half of data collection within the next 3 years. So if we think about how researchers are kind of betting on it, I think they see the adoption coming. To your point, Andrew, doesn't mean they're ready for adoption now, right? And so they're like, you go figure that out and let me know what works, and then I'll kind of get on the train. And so when I talk, and totally to Jordan's point, a lot of times when I come in to if I come out of a conversation and we've converted a cynic, kind of the 3 places that people feel the most comfortable is one, when we say to Jordan's point earlier, you don't have to do it all, right? Like, but you should start experimenting today and figure out what does make sense for you. Where do you see benefit? How does this fit into your process? The 3 kind of 2-day tactical ways we see that really resonating with researchers. The first is, let me make what I'm going to put into field better. Whether I need to narrow down 20 items in my list, whether I need to, if I'm a product researcher, come down and prioritize a list of potential features for qual, whatever it is, right? Let me take what I'm going to put into field and make it better by using synthetic at the front. Then sometimes people are saying, while I'm fielding, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to run the organic sample as I traditionally need to meet the needs of my stakeholders, but I'm going to run some synthetic in parallel because I'm not stopping what's working, but I'm going to start experimenting with what's new, right? I haven't stopped anything. I haven't slowed anything down. I'm still going to go to my readout with what would be our traditional approach. And then the third on the would be the other bookend of that research process is, if you've ever done research and you come out and you're like, shoot, how did we not ask this question? This finding makes no sense to me. I have hypotheses about why we're seeing this, but I don't really know. And we can't go back into field because I don't have another magical 3 weeks before I have to do a readout to my board or my team. Could synthetic be the 0 to 1, right? You have no information. Can you use it to guide hypotheses, even if you're going to go validate that later with traditional research, but you could have something to support, like, we think it might be this or that, and here's why we think that. The other is, I call it like the hallway ask. Like, if you've ever had your executive or your team kind of be like, how come we don't? Or have we ever thought about researching, right? And you either have to go through the whole process of validating why that is or isn't on your research agenda and where that falls among your myriad of priorities. But like, what if you could just go back to your desk and ask that question to 100 synthetic respondents and say, I think we should put this on the list. I don't, right? Like, it can be that first pass of things. Again, doesn't have to be a replacement, but it's a new piece of information, a new mode of research that's really going to, I think, hasten the speed to insight.
Yeah, I think a lot about a sort of amplified version of that last ask as well, which was back when I worked in the agency world. I worked on pitches, felt like every week, but maybe slightly less frequently. And like in those pitches, you're coming up with creative ideas, strategic ideas, business transformation ideas for the people that we're pitching to. And a lot of the time, you would love to field that with some humans to ask questions, and often we did. But like you had a situation, I remember on one pitch where we literally sent 10 junior strategists out onto the streets of London to ask questions of people on the street to try and have some data to back up the sort of strategic insight that we were leading with in the pitch. If you could, instead of doing that, actually design a fairly well designed and robustly designed survey and field it with 500 young people in the UK and come to the pitch and say, this is with synthetic respondents, so this isn't with real humans, but like, we know that the synthetic model is pretty good at approximating what this particular demographic thinks and says, and these numbers back up that this might be an interesting direction to go in. And then when you win the job, when you win the pitch, you go and field it with humans and you validate it properly and you do it properly. But like that ability to get some quantitative opinions, some objective opinions on the ideas that you're pitching, I think like I would have killed for synthetic in some of those pitch days when you've got like 2 days until the pitch. So you've got no time to do anything properly. Being able to do something that is good enough for that scenario, I think is really really exciting.
So I have a question. You mentioned briefly about partnership with ROI Rocket. Just curious if you can expand on that a little bit about maybe why you chose the ROI Rocket partnership and what that kind of looks like. And I realize this is really new for B2B research.
Yeah, I think when we thought about how do we expand the breadth and depth of what we have access to in terms of having high quality data that we can train and feel confident in the model, I think some of what we've learned throughout the process of starting this partnership in terms of the quality of what you're doing, the rigor with which you're assembling that sample, and the validation that's happening gives us kind of a lot of confidence in how we could trust that to be, as we said, kind of a representative and robust piece to the future of these models.
And last question, and this is self-serving completely. I think we have one true celebrity in our industry, and his name is Ryan Smith. Have you all met Ryan Smith? And he's still part of the organization, which is amazing. I'd love. Do you get a FaceTime with him?
I sadly do. I would say that geographically we are limited. So we're out of a different office than where he's located, so we haven't. But he is definitely a spirit and character within the world of Qualtrics.
Yeah, I've sadly not met him, but heard many stories.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. We, as Andrew said, I think 2 hours would not even still scratch the surface of the questions. I have probably 30 more questions written down. Y'all are doing really cool stuff, and really appreciate you all taking some time out to kind of go through it and kind of tell the industry a little bit about what you're doing. And so I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm sure Andrew has stuff to say too.
Absolutely. We'll have to let you know when we are in the Chicago area, and we can sit down and do a much longer format deep dive here.
Yeah, and again, thank you all so much. Have a great holiday.
You too.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.